and great pieces like Beethoven 9 or Shostakovich 10 or Shostakovich 5, Beethoven 7, Beethoven 5, they have something so universal that I think it just transcends time. It speaks to the human experience, I think. And as a human being, I think thousands of years ago to now, I think we are still very much the same in the core. And I think these pieces are so great because they just always touch that part. So yes, that's why we keep doing it.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from HonestyPill.com. You're listening to episode 35 of the Honesty Pill podcast. This season on the show, I'll be talking to people who are breaking the status quo, ditching outdated traditions, and building a better future for themselves and the people they work with. I'll be connecting you with musicians, sound healers, coaches, hip-hop artists, actors, world-class orchestra conductors, and people who not only inspire and educate every single day, but who are experts at talking about what they do so you can get inspired in your own work. My guest today is rock star orchestra conductor Aleem Chan, and that's Elimchan, who is one of the most sought-after young conductors and already widely admired for her unique combination of drama and tenderness, power and delicacy. Aleem has been the chief conductor of the Antwerp Symphony Orchestra in Belgium from the start of the 2019 concert season and has been the permanent guest conductor of the Royal Scottish National Orchestra since 2018. And for those of you paying attention at home, you might remember that 2019 was not a great year for symphony orchestras, or the world for that matter, thanks to the COVID-19 outbreak. So we're going to hear a little bit about what it was like to start a brand new job and then go immediately into a pandemic shutdown. I'm sure many of you can relate. One of the reasons I really wanted to talk to Aleem on this podcast was because from the moment she steps in front of an orchestra, you can tell she has this enormous musical presence and ability to connect on a really deep level with the people she's working with. You will probably sense that when you listen to the interview. I have been fortunate enough to work under her baton more than a few times at the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and I know she is a favorite guest conductor among my colleagues when she comes to visit. We are going to talk about both her life on the podium and off, including a pretty unusual sport that she took up during the pandemic, what it felt like to become the assistant conductor of the London Symphony Orchestra at a really young age, and even get a behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to be a leader in the administrative space of an artistic organization. But before we jump into today's interview, I have a quick pop quiz for you. Ready? Here goes. How many professional female conductors can you name right now? Ready? Go. Okay, how'd you do? Not so great? Need a little help? Okay, here are just a few names of incredible industry-leading musician powerhouse conductors who just happen to be female and whose names you need to know. American conductors Marin Alsop and Joanne Falletta, Susanna Malki from Finland, the Australian Simone Young, Barbara Hannigan, the Canadian soprano and conductor, the Chinese-American maestra Shan Zhong, Lithuanian's own Mirga Gražinytė Tyla, and of course my guest today, Hong Kong-born Aleem Chan. Why do I need to spell this list out? I shouldn't have to, but Aleem and I are going to talk a little bit about classical music's gender problem and what our orchestras and educational systems should be doing to fix it. Get out a piece of paper and a pencil because you're going to want to take notes on this. Aleem is a role model to young women everywhere as a global citizen traveling all over the world, speaking all kinds of different languages. Today, she's going to be right here in the Honesty Pill Mission Control Room, speaking the only language that I speak fluently, English. Thank you for that, Aleem. I know you're going to love this interview. Okay, let's dive into my conversation with Aleem Chan. Here it comes. When a musician and a conductor sit down to have a one-on-one chat, it's usually something to do with work or because the musician is about to get fired. I'm thrilled that we are going to have a totally different conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Aleem Chan.
Hello, Chris. Happy to talk to you.
So, of course, I'm completely kidding because I've enjoyed all of our conversations since we've met when you were a Gustavo Dudamel Fellow with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, which we're going to circle back and talk about in just a minute. First of all, where are you and what time is it? Where are we talking to you from?
So I am in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and it's currently 4:06 in the afternoon.
So one of the beautiful things about my job as a podcaster is we get to connect at all different times. It is currently 7 o'clock in the morning, which is a bewitching hour for musicians, but I have coffee, so we'll be okay. So you have kind of an unusual job, and I'm always interested in how musicians ended up choosing the instruments they do. I'm especially curious about how someone becomes a conductor. You didn't start out with a stick as your instrument, though, did you?
Do you count chopsticks?
Well, were you conducting with chopsticks? That's a great question.
Well, I do remember, I think I was very young already, and I was definitely one of these kids, that you see on YouTube. And, I don't think it was Rite of Spring, but definitely something, I think quite epic, like the planets, either the Mars or Jupiter from Host the Planets. I think I was definitely dancing with some sort of stick in my hand. So that definitely happened. But if we talk about real instruments, I started with piano when I was 6, and I played the cello when I was like around 11 or 12 years old because I really wanted to be in an orchestra. And piano doesn't really get any big parts. You're always in the back, and it's not also, it's not a part that all big pieces will have. So so I chose the cello. I also have sung a big part of my life. So I was in a children's choir and just in girls' choir and then in women's chorus. And so singing has been a big part. And of course, you really think about, the most wonderful, juicy pieces. And of course, it's the marriage between chorus and orchestras. That is like the whole universe, right? That's life, representation right there. So that's how I started.
Well, speaking of which, we're doing Beethoven 9 this week, so I totally get that. But you're talking about Rite of Spring, the planets, cello, children's choir. You must have had an incredible musical family. Where did all this influence come from? How did that get into your life in the first place?
So to be honest, I'm actually the odd one out. I'm the only musician in my family, professional wise. But I always think that, because my dad is an artist, he's a painter, and he's actually a teacher for a long time in an art school. For graphic design, but I can't draw. I literally can't draw. So I thought I might have turned his drawing pen into a baton, into, I think there's some mutation of genes.
Yep. Okay.
So that's how I thought I got my dad's art genes in that sense.
I did recall a YouTube video, since you mentioned YouTube, of a colleague whose son, he must have been around music all the time, and his son was conducting the Rite of Spring. And at first, you're kind of like, oh, that's really cute. Look at that kid. And then as a musician, I was watching the video, and this kid, he couldn't have been more than 6 years old, was nailing the last few pages of the Rite of Spring, which for listeners not familiar is one of the most complicated things. It's, people talk about math and music. That piece of music is so complex. So I love the idea of you conducting with chopsticks. And, you kind of are drawing patterns when you're conducting, though. So it's funny to me that you can't, and you haven't been able to translate that to paper in terms of drawing. But what an interesting background. So life off the podium, one of the things that keeps me balanced and sane and everything I have going on as a professional musician is what I do outside the practice room. For me, it's trail running. If I'm out in the mountains, I can keep sane. And you go to the gym for kind of an unusual sport also. Do you mind sharing what that sport is and why you love it so much?
Well, I am a big fan of boxing. Yes. And it's funny because I hated going to the gym for a long time. And of course, it was one of those moments when after a bad relationship and, the only thing to sort of pick yourself up is, you know what, I'm going to do something completely different, and to feel empowered and strong is to go to the gym. And that's when I thought, okay. And I went to the gym and I started seeing people boxing. And I thought, this is so far. When we think about like, oh, I need my arms, I need my hands, I will stay away from everything that will get, remotely even having the opportunity to get hurt. But at that moment, I think this was back in 2016. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do it. And I picked up a pair of gloves and I started it. And I just got hooked on, and it's such a great sport. And you're talking about, you loving to go into the mountains. That's when, your mind just get completely fresh, and you're preoccupied by something else completely, and I think if for boxing, I cannot think about anything else because the punch is coming my way and I'll get a black eye. And I don't want that, to be on my next rehearsal. So it's really cool. I love it.
Although that would be incredibly awesome if you walked on the podium with a black eye and just looked at the orcs like, what are you going to do about it? I love it.
Oh, do you want one yourself?
Exactly. No, but you just said something that's so critical in that there's two things I want to extrapolate from that comment, which is finding things that require you to be very, very deeply in the moment.
Yes.
Like, this is such a lame comparison, but for me, it's golf, because you have to be specifically in the shot that you are on at that moment. You can't be thinking about what you just did, and you can't be thinking about what's about to happen, because it just ruins all the connectivity of what you're capable of doing, and you won't perform. And I'm one of the few people who, I don't admit this freely, but I'm a terrible golfer, but I still enjoy it, I think, a lot more than a lot of people who are way better than me, because it's not about my score from last game. I don't even keep score sometimes. I'm just there in the moment. And running in the mountains is the same thing. If you're not paying attention, there's switchbacks, there are rocks, there are other runners. You have to be so in the moment. And musicians don't often think about doing that, because we're so immersed in, our technique and our career and trying to climb the ladder, taking auditions. I think it's brilliant that you found an outlet for that grounds you.
Absolutely. And, one of the best advices, and actually really related to what you just said, I love wine. And I visited one of very few women winemakers in Tuscany last summer. And she's quite old, like in her 80s. And she was telling me one thing, because I asked her, what is her favorite vintage and all that stuff. And she said to me, "Oh, Elaine, forget about your past glories."
Oh, that's great advice.
I think it's exactly what just, hit what you just said. I think we all, and as a conductor also, especially when you have like a bunch of concerts, like, you go on tour, it's quite tough, because when you think about, oh, last night was great, I just did that, like, awesome. And then today you try to recreate that same thing, it's already ruined. I think you just have to completely think about today and today's energy, like really just do it in the moment, and not, try to compare it with anything else or yourself. It's so tough.
All right. So you started boxing in 2016. So 2015-16 was a pretty good year for you. You became the assistant conductor of the London Symphony Orchestra.
I did.
Wow. That's epic. And you were also appointed to the Dudamel Fellowship Program with the Los Angeles Philharmonic the following season, which is where we met. What did it feel like? This is such a basic question, but what was it like for you to experience at, frankly, kind of a young age, these epic appointments? Did you feel like you were ready?
I think even until now, this question, are we ready? I don't think we're ever ready, right? Until you have to do it. But at the time, I really felt like Cinderella, like this moment. And again, it's very naive to say it, but it's really true, because, I just really came out of school. I graduated from Michigan in 2014, that May, 15, sorry. And, 15. And then so I was like, I moved to London and just jumped into this whole experience, which, is a big question mark. Just have to embrace it. But I thought, I looked back, I was like, okay, I did my master's, I did my DMA. There must be, there's certain, like, technique wise, right? I've put in the years, I put in the hours. So, but then to really do the job, I think is very different. You have to just do it, especially as a conductor, to get to stand in front of an orchestra. That is, where it all starts, then I can really practice the technique. I can see what works and what doesn't work. So, but I think, also, I got the LA fellowship after LSO. So I felt, LSO was sort of, maybe they saw more of my, like, oh my God, what this, and they got all of this reaction. And then when I got to LA, I'm more like, okay, I got this. I felt more comfortable, and so it was, in that sense, I felt, life also sort of prepares you in mysterious ways. And then you look back, you're like, okay, I'm glad that it happened like that.
Yeah, there's such an expectation when a conductor walks from the door to the podium. We're all sizing you up and trying to figure out, we can't help it. This person's going to lead us through this week of work, and we're going to try and create something. We're dying to know, what's it about? And I think that moment is completely about your attitude and how you carry yourself. I have to say, the first time that I sat in an orchestra where Seiji Ozawa walked through, he has an energy around him that is palpable. And it's just, from the moment he's on the stage, you can feel this electricity. And he has the ability to bring out of you more music than you knew was there in the first place, which is a great segue into my next question, which is, I think everybody who listens to this podcast already knows this, but I want to ask a really basic question about, what does it mean to be a conductor? Because a lot of times patrons of the orchestra will say, do you guys really need the conductor? I mean, what if they weren't there? It's such a funny question. The conductor is one of the most recognizable figures in the musical world, standing in front of choirs and orchestras, waving their magic wands, but what are they actually doing? Can you describe a little bit about what is the role of the conductor? How would you explain it maybe to a non-musician, like traffic cop versus artist?
I mean, I'm curious to hear when you get the question from the patrons, like, do you actually need a conductor? Because I always, I want to hear from a musician's point of view. But to me, I think to talk from a non-musician point, I always think it's like you have a soccer team, and I'm the coach because I don't actually get to play the match, right? I'm on the side. I'm like sort of like not exactly on the side, but then you're basically, I'm the one who sees the overview of the match. I see, what needs to happen. I saw what happened. And then in that moment, I need to make a decision, hopefully to change the next minute, right? What's going to happen. And I see also, okay, this person gets injured. I need to switch out, so I see things that people who are in the action don't see. I see perspectives that, you don't get or the person don't get. And I think that is something, is much more than a traffic cop. I'm this person that, when 80 people are there to do one thing, you just need someone to be able to say, what, can we all calm down and do this together? Especially we're talking about, for example, LA Phil. You have 80 to 100 sometimes. Best musicians, you all audition, you all sat there, you all have experiences. And of course, you all have strong points. You have also, sometimes very strong personalities. And, people want to get their own way, like, no, I think it's this way. No, but that, no. And I think the conductor is someone who also has this, power or charisma, with whatever way. I think Bernstein has this, beautiful quote. You just have to find whatever ways to somehow, or even humor, to somehow bring everyone to sort of like, no, this is how we do it, by coercing people, by convincing, by, I don't even know, by magic. And in that sense, I think the conductor is also the soul. You really sort of, like you have played Beethoven 9 many, many times, but each time, because of the conductor, it tastes different. But it's still Beethoven 9, but the experience, the color of the experience is different. And I think that is what the conductor brings, is that, sort of this extra. It's not just the notes. I mean, if you just play the notes, you can do it forever. I can just listen to a recording. But, why you can tell, like this is special, like why I experience something. I think it really depends on, what the conductors bring and how that collectively you create something together.
You mentioned something about the conductor being the soul. Mm-hmm. I think there's another element too, which is you're kind of the advocate for the composer's soul as well.
Absolutely.
Whether that's a living composer who's standing a few feet away with notes, or if it's Beethoven, yes. Right? You're sort of bringing that energy in, and also through the lens of how you view your own life experience and how that comes to why we're doing this in the first place. So why are we doing it? I mean, why should anyone listen to Beethoven 9? What would you answer the question, why should I come see a piece that's been played hundreds of times and recorded hundreds of times?
Well, first of all, I think it will be the first time to see me doing this piece with this particular group of people. Every time is different, and great pieces like Beethoven 9 or Shostakovich 10 or Shostakovich 5, Beethoven 7, Beethoven 5, they have something so universal that I think it just transcends time. It speaks to the human experience, I think. And as a human being, I think thousands of years ago to now, I think we are still very much the same in the core. And I think these pieces are so great because they just always touch that part. So yes, that's why we keep doing it. And it's not enough.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it's different every time for the musicians too. You're in different periods of your life. Maybe you had the worst week ever, and you've come in to play one of the most uplifting pieces, or, and frankly, that's a great segue into this question. You have been the chief conductor of the Antwerp Symphony from 2019. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And that's your family now. That's your home base. And you've traveled everywhere. You've played with everyone, but that's your main family. What does it feel like to look out and see their faces and connect with them on the level personally, as well as we're here to do this work? You mentioned being the coach of a football team or a soccer team. The coach is also dealing with the players' personal lives in a way. They can see who's having a good day, who's tired, who's super into it, and who's completely checked out. What is the role of the conductor there as far as noticing those things, engaging them, and bringing them into the space of creativity?
Well, that's a big question. And I mean, I think that's also something if we talk a little bit in the layman terms, it's more like kids love their godmothers and godfather because you don't always see them. And when you see them, you only get gifts and it's always, the good experience, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's more like when I'm like guest conducting. And it's fun, you're only there like sometimes 3 days, max a week, and then it's done, and it's usually just fun. But when I have like, a chief position with an orchestra, and like you said, we're dealing with the work, but that work is so much deeper. And I also like see them, I'm thinking, I basically go to Antwerp every month, and I spend a week there. And so I get to know who everyone's name is, their family, their energy. And sometimes even within a year, you can see a lot of changes. And let alone, I started this job in 2019 and then the world shut down. And we all went through, I think 2 years of the craziest time of like human existence. So to be honest, like this last season feels like the first because basically we shut down 2 years. But at the same time, we went through all these streaming concerts. We get together and we played for video cameras. We didn't play for people. And I think those sessions, like in the last year or so, are one of the most intense and very emotional experience. I mean, sometimes actually not good emotions, bad, because I think we were all worried. There were a lot of like, do we even have a future? Will audience come back? At one point, we were like, no, you know what? We're playing for ourselves. We're sitting with distance. Like all these are very crazy things that we went through. And I think that really cemented the relationship, because we survived that. And now we get to make music again for full halls. And now we can sit back together. That really, I think, then if you talk about music making is actually, I'm working with people. I'm working with, human souls. And I think a lot about, if I now also go back to what I do as a conductor, I think, if I can bring the best out of everyone in that one moment, I think I did my job. I think because of what we went through together, like with my family in Antwerp, and now we do the work, it's a completely different level of talking,
And we'll be right back. I want to give a huge thanks to the sponsor of the Honesty Pill podcast, Yamaha Corporation of America. I've been playing Yamaha equipment for decades in my own practice room, on stage with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, or touring all over the world, and Yamaha has been an absolute game changer. Something I love about Yamaha is the way they pursue excellence in all of their work and at all levels. They are as dedicated to bringing quality work for beginning students as they are for marquee artists. I admire their commitment to continuous improvement and creating a community that includes all of the musicians they serve. Make every note count. Play Yamaha. Hey everybody, one more thing before we get back to the show. I have sitting behind me on my bookshelf tons of books that I have read over the years as I was preparing for auditions. Books on sports psychology, books on developing good habits, books on improving your mindset, and books that are just awesome reading material to help you navigate a life in the arts. If you'd like a copy of my Audition Accelerator recommended reading for auditioners PDF sent right to your inbox, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to honestypill.com/subscribe, and you're going to put your name and your email in there, and I'm going to send you this list immediately. That's it. You can print it off, stick it to the wall next to your toothbrush. Then, as a subscriber, you will get emails from me now and then, and I promise I don't email too much, with amazing information, thoughts, announcements, offers, totally keeping you in the Honesty Pill mission control loop. So become a subscriber right now to get the book list and go to honestypill.com/subscribe. I'll see you inside. Okay, let's get back to the show. There were moments during the pandemic, and I'm sure I'm not the only musician who felt this way, looking around and seeing the loss and the suffering and the pain that the entire world was experiencing. And then we would try and get together and do a live stream of a brass quintet piece from the Hollywood Bowl. And it felt like the most ridiculous, pointless waste of energy. Like, why does anyone care about this? This is not important. We don't need to hear music right now. We need a vaccine. We need hospitals. People need oxygen. It made me just feel so shameful actually to be doing something so what I considered superfluous in the moment.
Yeah.
But then you realize that what we do, and I'm not trying to elevate classical music, but things that are for pleasure and inspiration is kind of like the whole point of why we go to work or why anyone has a 9 to 5 day job is so they can experience things that connect, whether it's pleasure or fright or horror or nostalgia, all of the emotions that we get when we look at a painting or walk through a museum is the point.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to hear that your orchestra also participated in some of these hybrid concerts to connect with the people who were looking for it.
Exactly.
And I also think we found some new audiences during this period of people who never would have come to Walt Disney Concert Hall or Carnegie Hall or the Musikverein or whatever, because they just turned on their internet connection and we were there.
Yes. Totally agree with you.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. And I hadn't really thought about that you started your brand new job at the beginning of all this. So congratulations on your debut this season in the real world of actually playing for people.
Yeah.
So people think that, conductors' lives are super glamorous and dinners and getting sponsored by Rolex and fancy planes. It's also a lot of administrative behind the scenes work as well. How do you find being a leader in the administrative space? And I guess what I'm saying is being sort of the artistic leader of the organization.
I think that's a very tricky thing, because I think I think this really happens when you're, chief somewhere, right? Because that's when I think there's this very delicate balance between artistic and management, because I'm both wearing the musician's hat and also the hat of a manager. And it's not easy. I mean, actually, right before this call, I was just dealing with, my own family. There's I think that's when it's like, a house. That's when the sort of the cleaning of the house, that kind of job that I don't like to do. It's like, and the garbage, who is going to do the dishes? This is the part, right? But actually, I think this is what is very important as my job, which I believe is that I have to speak up for the artistic side of things. In that sense, and I can only talk from my point of view. I think maybe some other people won't agree, but I always think that, this is when I bring in the voice of the musicians and I try to, sort of fight for them, because it's difficult when in a management side of things and in an organization, they're always, because of money, and then things start to get compromised. It's in the end always get compromised, right? We always start with a big goal. And anyway, many organizations don't dare to dream big, but LAFU, I think, is one of the rare places that you can really start with a canvas, and then you can aim at try to get most of it as possible. But I think if we get to dream big and set a goal high, it's anyway going to go down, right? Because things are going to come in, or reality this, and then the venue is this, But I think, I try to fight the war to make the best artistic decisions, because in the end, we are the ones on stage.
And I think it's a slippery slope too when you start compromising. I think most people wouldn't know if they're familiar with Berlioz' Symphonie Fantastique. That, and correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't originally scored for something like 12 harps.
There's more, at least that.
Or more. I mean, Berlioz was crazy, right? He had everything. In his pieces.
Yes.
So I'm getting chills thinking about it. We performed that piece with that many harps across the front of the stage, and I'd never seen anything like it. And musicians hadn't either, because when has an orchestra had the budget or the vision to actually respect the wishes of the composer, however outrageous? And it was something that people will never forget. So I think it's a beautiful thing that you are the champion of that. And not only the musicians, but the composers living,
the
they
side,
need it. Yeah, it needs to be represented, because these are the things that connect. Speaking of connecting, can we talk about Lucerne and getting to work with Bernard Haitink?
Oh.
How was it experience working with him?
I mean, just now, if you just mentioned his name, and my heart already get a bit like, I will always count him as, one of the most beautiful mentors that I've ever met. And, the time in Lucerne was, I look back and I have to say, because he did something with me that I was so upset, but at the same time I had to smile because I'm like, who did that? And it was Bernard Ken. It was a master class. And the thing is, at the end of the class, we all get assigned to conduct, something on the repertoire. And then there were audiences. And he gave me Bruckner 6 first movement. And I was the last one because it's the biggest piece on the concert, the presentation. And of course, I was just really preparing that. But the thing is, there's also Schumann, there's like Bartok on it. But then one of the earlier days, because we were preparing Bruckner 6, but he said, the orchestra has been playing these repertoire like every day the same. I want them to just sight read and do something else. So I will give you lunchtime. So the 6 participants, please study Bruckner's 6 second movement. And after lunchtime, I will pick one of you to conduct. So I was like, oh my God. And it's one of these, if Bruckner slow movements is one of the hardest things to do. So I was like quick study, having a breath in my mouth, like oh my God, And I came back and he picked someone else. And we all thought, oh, okay, it's off, right? Pressure off. We don't even look at it like the whole class. And now going back to this day, the last day of the class, it's my turn. I was thinking Bruckner 6 first movement. Okay. Getting in the tempo, the sound, okay. And then got on the podium and Mr. Haitink came to me, tapped on my back, was like, Elaine, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to tell you something you are not going to like. I'm like, okay. I'm like, what is it? Because I'm going to ask you to conduct the second movement. Go. And then he sort of like wobbled back to his, and then just sat down and looked at me. I didn't look at that movement since that quick half an hour lunchtime. And then I thought I was off the hook because someone else did it. And of course, he just looked at me like, And then there's audiences watching. I'm like, oh my God. I literally did this. I'm like, and I looked at the orchestra and I'm like, please help me. Oh God. And then just started, and I made some notes. It was so quick, and I just had to do it. And this is now going back to what we talked about. I have to be so in the moment, right? I was literally I felt like each bar was like punching my face, and you feel your head was just like this. It was ultra focus. It happened. I think he stopped me once. He stopped me and said, "Go back here. He wants me to listen to this voice in the oboe and something, and pay attention to the bass line." Okay. Did that one more time, got to the end. And then he came to me, he said, because I was totally just so tense. I think I didn't breathe for the whole 15, 16 minutes. and then he came to me and he said, Elaine, when you conduct, you made me listen. I had a tear. I think it was like a relief tear, angry tear, happy tear. And then of course his wife later came to me and said, I know you could be upset, but you know that Bernard only did that because he you could. And after that, he asked me to be his assistant, here and there. And then I assisted him in London, in the proms. And every time he would just talk to me about things and ask me to do things that when I think I couldn't, but he was like, yeah, you could. And of course, when he asks you, you can't just talk back to him. Okay, Bernard, I will. And of course, when in just this January, I was in Boston. I made my debut in Boston Symphony, and of course, I saw his pictures everywhere, and I felt his presence so strong in Symphony Hall, and it's like, yeah, I've missed him.
Yeah. What an incredible mentor that you had. And I want to ask you one specific question about his conducting style, because it has to do with the way people express themselves. Yeah. And please correct me on this, because I'm certainly no expert here, but it seems to me, and this might be hard to communicate on a podcast to people who aren't familiar with conductors, but the patterns that conductors use indicate things to the musicians. And the way those gestures are communicated mean things to the musicians as well. And he seemed to be always inside the smallest, most efficient little box that was just this tiny little thing, and it made you completely pay so close attention and be part of his little world he created. And then if he did go outside the box, the orchestra would just roar with energy in a way that other conductors have to flail their arms. Does that sound kind of accurate to his technique? And did he teach you that? Is that a thing that he did?
Yes. He's one of these that it's all essential what he did. Each gesture has meaning. And I think that's what he said, like, in the class. He always said, like, I remember other of my colleagues were on the podium and we were working so hard, we all try to impress, right? And then we have these like fancy gestures sometimes, or even like I don't know if you saw conductors do like double fist. And I remember, like, we were all trying to do so many fancy things, and he would just stop us. And because he would like, you worked very hard. Mm-hmm. And then you're like sweating already, like, arms are painful. And then he would be like, but I didn't see this. I don't see that. I didn't hear this. So go back and think about it. Do it again. And you thought, but I worked really hard. I was like, but then he was like, but if the orchestra doesn't, reflect that means your gesture is not meaningful. So it's all have to like cut it down to the fact that how do you show, right? How do you show the maximum with the minimum? And he's such a master with that. And at the same time, I think he has such a presence. Like, everything is small, but somehow you felt like you're in his world. I think that was I think this is something I can't even explain. He was teaching me once to do Wagner, Tristan and Isolde, the Prelude and Liebestod. And as a young conductor, it's very difficult, like with these romantic, with big lines, and how do you keep the line going and going? And of course, then probably I was one of those that was like going crazy, big arms already. And I'm like, still 5 pages to go. I don't know, And he said to me, he said, Elim, I don't know how to tell you. So let me just show you. And then I stood aside. He took the podium. Within half a minute, I started crying because it's all so emotional. But then you see him, he's just like, it's all, here. He didn't even raise his arm in the second or third page. And then when he raised his arm, like you said, yeah, so I was just sort of like, okay, you win. You win. Wagner wins, but yeah, you nailed it. You nailed how he was, sadly.
Well, as palpable as that is for you, it's probably 10x for the musicians who are connected to him too. Thank you for sharing that. I really wanted to hear your perspective on that. You mentioned Bruckner, Schumann, Bartok, Wagner. There are certain pieces of music that are considered golden rings in the orchestral trumpet repertoire, right? Brandenburg 2, Mahler 5, the Poem of Ecstasy. Once you've played them, you feel like you can check that box and you've conquered the world. Are there specific pieces of music that represent major milestones for you, or just something that you would consider to be the ultimate experience that you've already conducted or that you would like to lead an orchestra through?
I think Rite of Spring is always one of them. I think I definitely checked the box for myself, like after I did my first Rite of Spring. And of course, Rite of Spring has, like you said, the last few pages. I think even for musicians, I think everyone in the orchestra just always sweat because someone will always come in the rest and everyone else get, oh my God, So for conductors, it's like, you can't make a mistake in those pages because then you will get killed. Really, you will get killed. So Rite of Spring is definitely one of them. I even will consider Petrushka is another one. It's similar. Sometimes I even think Petrushka is even more difficult because I think it's just a hard piece to make a convincing case, especially the way it ends. It's like sort of So to make a big, to make it convincing is difficult. What can we say about Mahler? I'm on my quest now to finish each one. So now I've done 5, which is amazing. I'm going to do one. The first symphony was actually programmed in my, 2020, which now got canceled. So now it's coming back. I think Mahler 2 is one of these that I'm dying to do. to just experience the end when the chorus, singing the resurrection chorus. I mean, I'm hoping to do my complete Beethoven 9 very soon. I've done the last part, but then to go through the whole journey to the end, I mean, it must be very cute for you to hear me to say still haven't done my first complete Beethoven 9. But there are these, that it's on my list. I have to say Beethoven 5 was particularly emotional, especially I think my first one was actually in I did it in Antwerp. And it was one of these that, it's such an iconic piece. But how you set the first movement determines the end already. It was one of those, right? And I mean, like the end, the triumph, that you got when you broke out in C major, a non-stop C major coming from the C minor. I mean, like that's always somehow is very emotional. Bruckner is something I'm waiting. I need more white hairs. And it's especially after what I experienced with Mr. Haitink. I think it's something that it just takes life experiences. I think it's also this, time and what life lessons teach you. And these are outside of the practice rooms. I think these are things that and that's when you feel you're ready or not. And I know I'm not ready yet with Bruckner.
Conductors don't just work with professional musicians. All over the country, amateur groups such as choral societies and youth orchestras meet to make music together. Do you get a chance to work with younger musicians much?
Oh, a lot. I love working with young musicians. Actually, even I would want to work with just amateur musicians, and let alone, I'm not only young, sometimes adults. I'm really keen on doing these, like if we have like a community project that we can bring in, just people have played instruments in their life. And I think that just, it's such a life boost of energy when they can do it again. But I made a commitment to myself, a promise that every year I will do at least one youth orchestra project. I think it's a responsibility of an artist, of a conductor. And, I was just with the EUYO, which is the European Union Youth Orchestra. So it's a project started by Abado a long time ago. And it's just, that's when you see, I get a boost myself to believe that, yes, classical music it's still one of the greatest things ever on the earth. And you see that the future is in good hands,
Do you feel like a role model for young conductors?
Absolutely. And I think it's especially important for women as well, because the first orchestral conductor I've ever seen in my life was a woman. That made a big difference because I never thought it was a problem until suddenly it was a problem, because it was, people started asking things, and I was like, no, but I saw one already, when I was young. And I think now it really made it so meaningful when I meet audience back, in the backstage or, after concerts. You see these very young girls. They said, like, I never thought that this is possible. Or like they would tell their mothers, I want to, be like, what she does. That's when I'm like, please do, don't let anyone tell you no.
So I'm glad the conversation came here. Can we give some much needed attention to classical music's gender problem? And I'm just going to share this with our listeners here. In September 2013, Maren Alsop became the first woman to conduct the last night of the proms in its 118-year history. And only days before, a particular male conductor, who I will not name here, told an interviewer that female conductors risked distracting the musicians and that the demands of families meant they weren't able to dedicate themselves to the demanding role of leading an orchestra. The furor that ensued brought much needed attention to classical music's gender problem. And in her podium speech, Maren Alsop acknowledged that there was a lot made of this and said, I'm shocked that in 2013, there can still be firsts for women. So what is your take on why there are still not as many professional female conductors as there are male conductors?
I think, first of all, there are just not enough role models, especially, look, I was born in Hong Kong. I didn't know Maren Alsop back then. I didn't know him. And if you really talk about, Joanna Valletta, who else? Susanna Malky. But these are all like, they came later. And it's very sort of on a one case, and it was really looked as this is a very rare thing. So yes, I think this is definitely one big thing. And I definitely feel like, that's why I think to go back to your last my experience of sharing, I felt responsible as a woman conductor, plus also an Asian in the classical music scene. Like where I am right now is just, it is important to encourage more people to follow the path. And it is difficult. I mean, anyway, to be a conductor is a freaking difficult job for both men and women. But I think, I get very discouraged early on, when I was in school. They said to me, "Oh, Aleem, you want to do conducting? Maybe you should stay with choral conducting. It's easier." You see, immediately they try to, and I'm like, why is that? Why? And also they said, the travel is going to be hard. And then immediately this whole thing of like, being a woman, you need to think about family, having kids. And then this whole thing about, well, you need to, also be beautiful, be funny, be charismatic, but also be a good mother. And you have to be a strong leader. It's just not possible. I mean, there's no Wonder Woman. I mean, we hope, I hope that I'm Wonder Woman, but in reality, it's just not possible because we all have different priorities. I think that's why it is very, it is still, not an easy choice to make.
I think it needs to be said out loud that we need to put the responsibility with the orchestras and with our educational systems. In your story of your teacher saying, why don't you just settle with choral conducting because it's easier, is indicative of where we need to start. I mean, I don't know exactly what orchestras and schools need to be doing specifically to fix this, but I do know if there are no role models, how are women going to come into this profession? Frankly, if there are no women role models, how are they going to come into any profession? That's where we need to start.
Yep, it is.
It's a big topic. And for the record, I think you are Wonder Woman and you're doing amazing. So keep it up. All right, a couple more questions. You're doing all right? You hanging in here?
Absolutely. Go on.
I can't imagine what it's like to conduct all over the world. And, this must require just epic communication skills, including being fluent in all different kinds of languages. How many languages can you speak fluently or otherwise?
Oh, actually, that's something, it's something I would love to work on. So of course I speak Cantonese. I'm from Hong Kong. I also speak Mandarin. I speak English. And actually, funny enough, I lived in Chile for almost a year. I got thrown into a project. This was like after my master's. I took a year off. And so I could actually sort of rehearse in Spanish because I worked with a youth orchestra project there, and I had to pick up Spanish because literally I was like cold shower, like from nothing to like, okay, like please. So I could do sort of that. And, but of course, in music, there's just German and Italian, which is very, very important languages. So those I have I'm not fluent, but I've taken like 4 years Italian back in college, and also 1 year of German, which are like two languages that now I'm like, I really want to be fluent. Maybe German. I also, because I live in Amsterdam, I have a Dutch husband. And that is something that Dutch is something quite a big project during my lockdown times, because when everything stopped, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to pick up Dutch because he made me very guilty. He learned Chinese. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I can't escape this anymore. So yes, Dutch as well.
It's amazing. So I was thinking about where you live and how the travel magazines often, identify favorite restaurants and one thing about the city that you should do. And the first thing I think of when I think of Belgium and Antwerp is beer. And of course, I'm probably letting my brass player tendencies. Actually, you can see I have my Art of Fermentation book sitting right there.
I see that. The beer, yes.
What do you love about living in Antwerp, and what would somebody want to visit if they came to see you?
I live in Amsterdam, and Antwerp is like a train right away, like 1 hour, 10 minutes. So it's very easy. That's why I think I love living in this area, because I can go anywhere so easy, plane or train, or driving. But Antwerp is a fascinating place because it is actually it's made up of a lot of different neighborhoods that each one of them has a very distinct flavor. So you have like the Jewish quarter, you have like this green quarter, you have, and all of that just coming together. And literally you can, bike through all of them. And the switch is so strong, like you literally know, like one street away, boom, and then you're like in the next one. So you really feel, so it's very different, yet you're in the same, they find a way to sort of exist in a harmony together. Um, it's a little bit messy, but in the mess, there's this beauty to it. And I love that, in Belgium, people just love food. They have this, they just, especially like the bakeries. Oh my God, like fresh bread every morning. I mean, because it's very close to the French school. They make like, so the breads, amazing. Coffee, beer, of course, is a huge tradition. I mean, after concerts, just go for beer. Like, don't even work, like ask for champagne or like, no, just go for beer. And they have all these options, right? So, I mean, I discovered I could just sit down at like a beer place and then just be like completely blown away because there's so many kinds, like different flavors, different kind of like, I can't even, count. So yes, it is a place where you can find all these hidden like corners of great food and great drinks, and it's just a beautiful place.
I think the beer brewing tradition goes back as far as classical music, and there's as much variety therein as well, what you were looking for. What would you do if you were not a musician?
I would totally become a detective or a spy.
I was not expecting that answer.
No.
I love it. All right. Okay, awesome. So what would you be spying? What would you be detecting? True crime?
I would totally, yes, actually, yes, because I'm such a big fan of like anything crime related. So, and I love like, sort of profiling criminals or things like that. So I like pick up clues and like really try to find out. So like, who is behind all this?
Have you watched Only Murders in the Building?
Yes. I've like the second season is coming out, right?
It's coming in a few weeks. We are ready. We're dying for this to come back. Okay, awesome.
Me too. I'm good.
All right, we'll compare notes.
Absolutely.
All right, I have a few rapid fire questions here, and then we'll wrap up. What's the best piece of advice you were ever given?
I think it's really this right now. What came up in my head is what this lady that I met in Italy, who told me just really straight in my face, like, forget about your past glory. And I think that is something I'm working on, especially this year, and especially difficult because we're week in, week out going through very different programs, and of course we're working with excellent people, and every week you're trying to create something special. And of course, reality wise, it cannot be always this, right? So we try to recreate it, and then if I can't recreate it, I beat myself up. And sometimes just have to sort of really remember that today, if I can, 80% is what I can bring the max, then let's just accept it this 80%. But if this 80% is my best, and if I give my best today, I should not have any regrets, and to find little things to to be happy with.
Since there are a lot of young musicians listening to this podcast, what would you say has gotten easier for aspiring musicians in the last 20 years?
I think definitely opportunities. There's so many opportunities now. And especially I think technology has helped a lot, like social media. I think the explosion of social media is something that I mean, even the lockdown, how much content has just sort of got, thrown up into the internet, how easily now you can really share things. I think the word share has totally different definition, in this years. You can literally, make a video of yourself and just like, a few seconds later, it can be seen from, a person in Thailand. It's crazy. And I think that's why I think if you have something cool to say, if you have a good idea, you can just throw it out there and ask, I think this sort of whole thing about sharing about who is your friend, working with people, this sort of borders has completely broken down. And I think that's really cool. It's not something that I had when I was young. And this whole thing also, of course, if I really think about conductors, I can now go to see, before I would think, okay, I need to go to my local concert hall and to just see who is, working there at that week. But now, digital concert hall, you can see Berlin Philharmonic playing every week. And then, if you think it's too pricey, there's even student discount, these things. And so there are almost no excuses to not have access. I think that is something totally new. And of course, I think that's why I think if nowadays people still say, "Oh, well, I can't," like I don't think so. Like this, I mean, I think the world right now is really sort of spoon feeding. It's just that you need to open your mouth. That's all you need, and there will be a way. I mean, you have to chill it, but yeah, I think that is something. And also Spotify, like all these recordings back in the day, I thought I have to go into the library, I have to burn the CD. Remember, like have to like if I really wanted this, like I don't know, Stokowski, this year recording this, I remember I had to bring my computer, sit on the floor, and have this like all these little stack of CDs so I can burn a copy of them. Nowadays, I can just go on Spotify or YouTube, and then it's all there. And I'm like, wow! And these rare videos are all completely just free. So yeah, the world it's just right there.
I'm going to date myself here. I wasn't burning CDs. I had a Sony Pro Walkman, and I was recording records in my library so I could get the excerpts learned. So yeah, a little different experience for you there, but it's true. I love looking at YouTube, and I will study performances of other professional orchestras and watch the conductor to see what's happening. I'll also look at amateur groups sometimes too and see what were the things that were issues for them, especially when I'm coaching, and see like what are the typical spots that are going to be problems. So yeah, I think that has definitely gotten easier access. Just the fact that I know that you had a helicopter ride over your city because of social media. It helps with connectivity too, and humanizing art and making it accessible to everybody. Awesome. Yes. Great answer. Okay, here's your last question. If there existed an actual honesty pill that could change one thing about you instantly, it could be adding a superpower or removing a weakness or your kryptonite, what would that be for you?
Goodness. It's like there's like one genie and I have one wish. Can I not use this on myself? Can I use this for the world?
Of course.
I think right now, let's stop the war. I think especially I think we as human beings, these years, we have gone through so much. I almost felt like once after the pandemic, and even the pandemic, it brought out so many things, right? Like, I think just even the topic of vaccines, and even the topic of of COVID itself. I think a lot of friendships, families have broken, or there's a lot of loss already. And now, right after it, there's a war that's still going on, and and the world is just gonna split further and further. And and I think if I could get a pill that can sort of at least I can take away the war first. We still have other big issues, right? We have climate change. We have hunger is another big problem. No rain, that's another problem. I think water, it will be something very serious in the coming years as well. So we have enough problems. So right now, I think if we can stop the war.
Aleem Chen, thank you so much. I know you're a busy person and you have a lot going on in your life right now. I so appreciate what you do. Keep doing what you do. And thank you for spending an hour with me chatting. I know my listeners are going to love this interview. And hey, look, if you ever need trumpet subs in your orchestra, I am sure that the LA Phil trumpet section will work in exchange for beer. So please keep us in mind.
So keep that in mind.
Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye. Thank you so much to my friend and colleague Aleem Chen for taking the time to speak with us today on the podcast. And if you are an orchestral musician, I truly hope you get a chance to work with this amazing conductor, musician, and human being. I can't wait for her to be on the podium again at Walt Disney Concert Hall next spring for some Tchaikovsky with the LA Phil. And Aleem, if you're listening, next time you're in LA, bring the trumpet section some of that amazing Belgian beer if you have room in your suitcase, and I promise we'll keep the percussionists in line. And listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Aleem and see where she'll be conducting next, you can find out everything at aleemchan.nl, as in Netherlands. That's aleemchan.nl. And go right now and follow her on Instagram account, which is at It's Aleem Chen, where you can see pictures from her helicopter ride high above the city where she makes music in Antwerp. All right, everybody, this has been the Honesty Pill Podcast, episode 35. You can find out more at honestypill.com. And if you like what you are hearing on this podcast, become a subscriber to the Honesty Pill mailing list. I promise it's not boring. I won't spam you. It's actually a really cool community to be a part of. I give away tons of great information, breaking news about workshops I'm offering, and every now and then, even a free pair of tickets to the LA Phil in downtown Los Angeles. How can you beat that? Head to honestypill.com/subscribe subscribe right now and join this awesome community. Okay, I'm out of here. I've got an audition course to prepare. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.